You know, there are some stories, some urban legends that tap into a fear that's, well, it's a lot closer to home. It's not about monsters in the woods. It's about the familiar things around you suddenly feeling wrong. Today, we're going to talk about one of Japan's most unsettling legends, sukima onna, the girl in the gap, and why it is so darn good at making your own home feel like the most dangerous place on earth.
Seriously, think about it for a second. That little space between your bookshelf and the wall, the thin crack up on the ceiling, that tiny sliver of darkness under your bedroom door. You see them all the time, right? So much that you kind of stop seeing them. They just blend into the background.
But what if those empty spaces weren't actually empty? What if something was living in them? And what if, right now, from inside one of those tiny slivers of shadow, a pair of eyes was staring directly at you?
Well, that exact fear has a name, and it has a story. Our story starts with a 25-year-old guy named Isamu, who just moved into a new place in Osaka. He was all excited, a fresh start, but it turns out his new beginning came with something extra, something he definitely didn't invite.
It didn't start with a bang. It was subtle at first. You know that feeling, right? That little prickle on the back of your neck that just screams, you're not alone. Even when he was totally by himself, surrounded by his own stuff in his new house, Isamu just could not shake this creepy feeling that someone, somewhere inside with him, was always watching.
What started as just a vague, uneasy feeling quickly spiraled into pure terror. Because that unseen presence, it started making itself known. And it turned Isamu's brand new home from a sanctuary into a total prison. It would happen when he was just trying to have dinner. He'd get this sudden, paralyzing feeling that a pair of eyes was staring at him from the little gap in the drapes. He'd look and, of course, see nothing. But the feeling, it was absolutely real.
And there was no escape, not even in the most private moments. He'd be in the bathroom and get this chilling sensation that something was on the other side, looking in from that tiny crack of space underneath the door.
And then, the feeling became a vision. He'd jolt awake in the middle of the night, his heart just pounding, and for a split second, he'd swear he could see them, two pale white eyes just floating in the pitch-black darkness of his room. And then, poof, they'd be gone.
Isamu's life just completely fell apart. I mean, look how fast this happened. Day 1, he moves in. By the end of week 1, that feeling of being watched is constant. Week 2, he's tearing his house apart, looking for someone who isn't there. Then it gets worse. By week 3, he's literally covering every single crack and gap in his home with tape. And by the end of the first month, he's become a total shut-in, way too scared to even open his front door.
So after a few weeks of Isamu being a total ghost, his coworkers got really worried and decided they had to go check on him. They get to his house and find the whole place sealed up from the inside. When they finally manage to get in, they find Isamu, a complete mess, just terrified on the floor.
He was whispering, totally frantic, trying to explain why he couldn't leave. He kept saying the girl wouldn't let him. He told them if he tried to leave, she would get lonely, and then she'd get angry. And he was absolutely terrified of what would happen if she got angry. His friends are trying to be rational, telling him nobody's there, that he's just imagining things. But Isamu's eyes were just locked on one spot. He slowly lifted this trembling finger and pointed right at his dressing table. To try and prove to him that nothing was there, they agreed to go have a look. Now, the gap Isamu was pointing to was just impossibly small. It was barely 5 centimeters wide. It was nothing, a sliver of space. There's no way anything could fit in there. Or at least, that's what they thought. Because as his friends leaned in and peered into that tiny, dark space, their blood just turned to ice. Standing there, completely still, was a girl. She had this long, dark hair that was covering most of her face, and they could just make out her hands at her sides, tipped with these unnaturally sharp-looking nails. And that was the absolute worst part. She wasn't doing anything, she wasn't moving, she wasn't making a sound. She was just standing sideways in a 5-centimeter gap, staring right back at them. In that moment, pure animal panic took over. His friends scrambled, they fell over each other trying to get out of that house, and they left Isamu to his fate. They just ran and never looked back. Nobody ever saw or heard from Isamu again. So what on earth did they see in that gap? Well, Isamu's story is basically the textbook cautionary tale of a very specific spirit from Japanese folklore.
Sukima onna, the girl in the gap. So let's break down the actual legend behind all this terror.
Sukima onna literally means gap woman. And what makes her so uniquely terrifying is where she lives. Not in some haunted forest or creepy old mansion. No, she lives in the forgotten nooks and crannies of your own home. She basically turns your safe space against you.
The legend plays directly on that primal fear of being watched. She doesn't have to do anything but stare. But if you make the mistake of making eye contact with her, the game changes. She'll ask you if you want to play hide and seek, and if you say yes, or if you even hesitate for a second, she snatches you, dragging you into the gap with her, to a dimension that no one has ever come back from.
So what about Isamu's friends, the ones who saw her and ran? Well, their story didn't end there, because once you see her, you can't unsee her. They started noticing the gaps in their own homes, and every time they looked, she was there, staring. Within just a few months, every single one of them had also vanished, without a trace.
And this brings us to the most chilling and honestly the most brilliant part of the Sukima onna legend. Once she's got her eyes on you, what can you possibly do? Is there any way out?
Well, according to the legend, the answer is no. There is no escape. In fact, trying to get help is the absolute worst thing you can do. The spirit just follows you. Whoever you tell, she now has a new target. You don't break the curse, you just spread it, making sure that you have to suffer completely and utterly alone. And that's the real power of this story, isn't it? It doesn't need a haunted house or a dark forest. It just needs a little crack in the wall. It takes the most normal, boring things that we see every day and turns them into windows for something terrifying to peer through. So, let me leave you with this. The next time you're home alone and you get that feeling, where are you going to look first? Or maybe a better question is, where are you going to try your absolute hardest not to look?